All right, friends and family, my name is John Lushameza. Welcome to the Counter Revolution podcast. The Counter Revolution podcast is dedicated to exploring the meaning of education, a Christian philosophy of education, and why every Christian should have an explicitly and unapologetically Christian philosophy of education. We believe that education is discipleship and missional. All education is. Therefore, we believe education is the job of the parents. All education, formal and spiritual, is the job of the family first and foremost in the local church, but not the government, according to the Bible. Our mission, then, is to reclaim and reform all education to the church and to restore her as to her rightful place as foundation and pillar of truth. Today, I am so excited to speak to a man who I believe is a giant of the church, a great gift to the body of Christ. Colonel Iremo Jr. has served for 49 years in pastoral ministry as a campus pastor, a congregational minister, and an army chaplain or director of a Christian ministry. A South Carolina native, he is a graduate of the Citadel with a BA in political science and was graduated from Grace Theological Seminary cum laude with an MDiv, Master of Divinity, in 1974, and with a THM, Master of Theology, in 1976. He served 19 years as an Army Reserve chaplain, retiring as Lieutenant Colonel in 1999. Ray has been married to the former Gail Lawrence Pinckney of Charleston, South Carolina for 54 years. They have 4 children, 9 grandchildren. Ray and Gail had a long term involvement in private Christian education or homeschooling. Currently, Ray serves as the president of Frontline Ministry Inc., which focuses on prayer, revival, and Christian education, and is celebrating 30 years of ministry in 2024. He is the founder and director of Exodus Mandate Project, the Exodus Mandate Project, which is at www.exodusmandate.org. That will be in the description below. It was launched in 1997. He is a chairman emeritus of a Christian education initiative, Christ EDU, which was launched February 2019 and served as chairman for 4 years, 4.5 years. He is chairman of Public School Exit. We have talked about Public School Exit before, which was launched in 2020. He is the author of Let My Children Go and co-authored with his wife Gail The Promise of Jonadab, Building a Christian Family Legacy in a Time of Cultural Decline. He is the executive producer of the 2011 award-winning film Indoctrination. So without further ado, I would like to give to you my conversation with a great man of God, Lieutenant Colonel Iremo Jr. So I want to say first and foremost, thank you so much for coming onto the Counter Revolution podcast. I kind of already shared with you about the Counter Revolution podcast, but one thing I would like to kind of add on to that is that the Counter Revolution podcast is basically an offshoot or an offspring of the Exodus mandate. I
Okay.
have the same heart and desire to see, at the very least, Christian children out of public school.
Yes.
So just to start off here, sir, we've already shared that you were a chaplain in the military, but can you just share a little bit about yourself in addition to that?
Okay. Well, I turned 80 years old about 6 months ago. My
Happy
wife and I
birthday.
started schooling our oldest son in 1977 when I was finishing up my theological seminary training at Grace Seminary in Winona Lake, Indiana. And
Hmm.
we were we had done all the classwork, but not the thesis. So we moved to Purdue University to start a campus church for reaching university students. And this was in 1977. And our oldest son was 6. And we
Right.
decided that we weren't going to put him in a public school for many of the same reasons that people don't do it today. And then we started homeschooling him, and we call it the family school. And we didn't know another family homeschooling for 4 or 5 years after that. So that was our beginning, and it was very experimental, very tentative. We were uncertain if we were doing the right thing, but we felt we were, and we forged ahead. And then in 1994, 95, I began to move with the idea of the Exodus mandate that we should try to encourage other families and churches to do the same thing to get their kids out into Christian schools or into homeschooling. And officially, we launched the Exodus mandate in November of 1997. And
Uh
we've
huh.
been doing it about 30 years. And we were kind of the pioneers nationally with the idea of getting out and urging others to get their kids out too. That was kind of the new thing in our day.
Awesome. Um, so did you guys have a legal basis like to take your kids out of public school? Did you guys have any reference like someone else that had done it, or did you guys just do it?
Well, we didn't know another family homeschooling for about 4 years in Indiana. Not and the state of Indiana found out about it and contacted us and want to know why we were doing that. And we were very concerned that we might have litigation, but it never came. And they asked me, um, I think I told them it's been a long time now, since '97, um,
Yeah.
that they couldn't stop us from homeschooling our kids if they couldn't demonstrate that they were being harmed in some way, and that we had the right to do it. And they then came back to us later and asked us if we would help them, the state of Indiana, since they didn't know anybody else doing it, to help them create a homeschool permission form. The government needs a
Okay.
form for everything. And I said,
Yeah.
well, I didn't mind helping them create a homeschool notification form, but I wasn't going to help them create a permission form because it wasn't their, they didn't have to give permission. I had permission from the Lord to do it, but I would be willing to help them have a notification that where families would notify them. And that was the end of it. They never contacted me again. So we never had any litigation, but we were concerned we might have a lawsuit. And I had contacted a very prominent Christian constitutional lawyer who
Mhm.
defended Christian schools against the government, and he was prepared to step up and be my lawyer if I needed him. And that all happened around, got to think, the probably after the turn of the 1980s. So that was very early in our homeschool experience, but we never had litigation.
So what did you guys do for curriculum? You I assume, since you felt the call from God to remove your kids, or maybe your kid at the time, um did you did you have guys have a background in education, or how did you guys come about with your curriculum to start with?
Well, both my wife and I are educated. She had her bachelor's in English, and she had always sort of planned to be a teacher or had given thought to it. So she was very competent. And honestly, in the early days, 80% of the workload fell on her. But we had a we she created some curriculum, but there was no curriculum for homeschoolers in those days. This was in the 70s. So we were getting discarded books or old Christian books from the local Christian school, and we were getting the curriculum for Bob Jones University, Bob Jones Press, and A. Beckham,
Right.
and they were pretty much the standard curriculum in the early days. So we were getting it secondhand, but we did have Christian curricula, and we were using other books, and so we kind of pieced together a program,
Yeah.
and so it worked out. And
That's that.
our oldest son. He's 53 now, and he has four children. He homeschooled his kids a while, but then his wife got hired to teach at a local Christian school, so he had to put them all in school. So the older ones were homeschooled for a time, but the younger ones have been in the Christian school the whole time through their career. So we've got a long 35-year history with this particular Christian school.
Wow. That is amazing. Amazing to hear. Um and then, so you guys then decide you want to help rescue other people's children. Um can you take us back to the early 90s, then, before
Yeah,
Exodus mandate
yeah. I'm,
was
I'm really
started?
happy
Like,
you're asking.
what yeah,
I'm happy you're
go
asking this
ahead.
question. I don't get it a lot, and it is an important thing in my own personal growth. We began to see in the, and I would say in the early years, the harm that public school was doing to Christian children wasn't as clear to me. I mean, I knew it wasn't good, but the horror of what they're doing has really manifested itself in the last several decades. Um, in some places, the public school system could be kind of benign. They allowed Christian teachers to teach, and so there was kind of a level playing field. But that really changed in the early 90s. And I wrote a little pamphlet, and I think we emailed it to you, called Let My Children Go, Exodus Mandate. It was a sermon, and it was published in a Christian newspaper in Greenville, South Carolina in
Hmm.
1995. And I laid out my vision there for what I wanted to do, and it was only a local thing in the state of South Carolina. That was as
Yeah.
far as I could see, and but it was my plan. And so in '97, I went to the big education conference in Washington D.C. put on by a lot of the conservative groups, Heritage Foundation, Homeschool Legal Defense, a lot of the standard conservative policy groups that we all rely on today, Concerned
Yeah.
Women for America. And it was a all-day event attended by about 800 people from around the nation. And I went up, drove up for it, and I remember being there all day listening to these speakers talking about the state and the condition of public education. Now, this was in February of 1997. And I
Yeah.
remember just being amazed that nobody had a plan to deal with it. And I knew the liberals or the left or the Marxists had a plan, and they'd been working their plan for 100 years. And the
Yeah.
conservatives and Christian right people didn't have a clue about what to do. And all they could say was, somebody do something and repeal bad laws. And I went out of that meeting that day, and I just felt like God called me to do this. And I said, somehow, with God's help, I'm going to get several million children out of these pagan, godless, Marxist schools. And that was all that came to me. And I had already been advocating it in my state. And so I began to enlarge my vision. So in November of 97, I made a public announcement during the Promise Keeper weekend celebration in Washington, D.C., and I publicly launched the Exodus Mandate Project. That was in November of 97. And, had a press
Mm.
conference and that sort of thing. So that was the beginning of it. In the first few years, I got nothing but opposition or silence. Uh,
Yeah.
the conservative Christian community wasn't ready for it, but I was ready, and that's what mattered. And so we kind of went along for years, slow growing. We built an organization, Exodus Mandate, and for your audience, that's exodusmandate.org, exodusmandate.org. And we had regular, steady growth, but it was slow going. But when the pandemic hit, and about 4 years ago, it just broke our world open in a new and exciting way. And so a lot of the things that you're seeing now with Alex Newman, Diane Douglas, publicschoolexit.com, a lot of these are things that have happened in the last 4 to 6 years.
Yeah.
So that's
Now,
kind of the short version, but we've been doing it 30 years.
yeah, and I'm forever thankful for the work that you men like Alex Newman um
Mm-hmm.
and people like Samuel Blumenfeld, the work
Right.
that has been done thus far to kind of pave the way for us, the young bucks, up and coming, I guess, in the fight. And so
Right.
one of the things that the Lord put on my heart when I began thinking about this thing that I'm trying to do in my own community, but also just talking to people across the country, is to not forget that we stand on the shoulders of people, men like you, that has gone before us and laid the foundation. In fact, basically, it is my belief that people like you, people like Alex Newman, Samuel Blumenfeld, and others that went before them that have been sounding the alarm, they have been ignored.
Mm-hmm.
The men of God, and I call you guys prophets, the prophets of God in our time have been ignored. And I believe the church, at least in America here, is suffering the consequences today because of it, and the country at large because of it.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I would say it could be pretty discouraging. Um, I couldn't have kept it up all the years I did if I hadn't had success. I couldn't be like Jeremiah, he preached and nobody listened. I was always having some success, but it was small.
Yeah,
But I would get a convert or someone would join the effort, but it was small. But when the pandemic hit, it just broke this whole thing open in an exciting way. And so Sam Blumenfeld, you're right. He was one of the pioneer scholars and thinkers. when I offered the Exodus mandate in really 1997, I would not have ventured out and charted a different course than the church at large was doing if I didn't feel like I was standing on some really good ground. And I had read Sam's book called Is Public Education Necessary? I just don't quite remember the year I read that, but it really opened my mind. And so he was really a foundational writer and scholar for our movement, back in the early 90s. And Alex, of course, is really our star now. He's young. I think he's only about 38. I'm 80. And he is just all over the country speaking, and he has his own radio, TV, internet program. He's written this book recently called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, which is a fantastic book and an important book in the movement. So we have, and I'm 80, and what's exciting to me is there are so many young men and women coming along in the movement that are in their 30s, 40s, or 50s, and they have years ahead of them. And I hope to be around a few more years, but when you get to be 80, your time is limited. So, but my wife and I are living our dream, and it's a dream, and it's coming to pass. So you just can't imagine the excitement that is for an old man like me. So thank you for having Diane Douglas and Alex on your show. Diane, as you know, is the superintendent of all the public schools in the state of Arizona. She was the senior most
Yeah.
elected public educator in the state. And she was always a Christian and very conservative. And she realized through her experience that she can't reform the system. It can't be fixed. And so she's completely switched sides. And she wrote the foreword for Alex's book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. And that book is important if you can get it into your community more, particularly getting pastors to read it. It can really make a difference.
Yeah. I have the book here. And the book was the
Oh, good.
reason actually the book was the reason that I invited uh Miss Diane to talk to me, because in the book she actually said what you just said, that I've been at the top of the mountain, and I promise you, you can't fix the system. The system is doing exactly what the system is supposed to be
Yeah.
doing. So you guys, you start Exodus mandate. I'm curious to hear what kind of support did you get, if any, from the church? Because yeah, did you
Okay.
get any support initially, or did it come gradually?
It came gradually. Uh, I started in '97. And if you're in a ministry, you've got to raise money to support yourself. And my wife was teaching at a Christian school at the time, and I just had come out of the army, and I had a good salary there. But when I came out, I didn't have that anymore. So I had to
Mm.
depend on donations and gifts, and they were pretty hard to come by the first couple of years. But she had a pretty good job, and she was bringing our health insurance, so I couldn't have survived on my income. I think the first year we didn't take in more than 12,000. I had two donors that were close friends, and they really loved me and Gail, my wife, but they both of them said, "Ray,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a good idea or not. I don't know whether I believe in what you're doing or not, but we believe in you and your wife, and so we're going to stick behind you and help you, even though we're not sure we agree with what you're doing." They knew it wasn't
Yeah.
they knew it wasn't wrong, but they didn't think it was such a good idea. So I picked up one big donor after about 3 or 4 years was giving me 30,000 a year, and that was a big step. We still don't have a huge donor pool, and I don't want to say what we take in yearly, but it's enough to sustain 2.5 staff. But what's happened is that we formed this alliance called the Christian Education Initiative, and that web
Yeah.
page is christedu.org, and it's an alliance of 24 organizations like Exodus Mandate. Public
Yeah.
School Exit is a member, and I was the founding chairman of that, and the founding chairman and the until August. I stepped down in August, and we've got a new
Yeah.
chairman, but I'm still on the executive committee, and that has really got tremendous impact because we've got a member groups. We A couple of the groups there they have a budget of 2, 3, or 5 million a year, and we function as kind of a staff to help guide that. So our movement is just exploding. Alex Newman is a member. Um, Lee Borton's with Classical Conversations. We've got some really influential groups. It's christedu.org. And so that's a new thing. It's about less than 5 years old. Public School Exit, I'm the chairman of the board. Alex is the director. It's about 4.5 years old. So there's so many new programs, organizations, and ministries. Our world is just exploding. And I hate to tell you, John, it's a worldwide movement. It's not just in the United States. It's happening all over the world. Homeschooling and Christian schooling is growing in China, Brazil. One of our groups has 130 schools in Brazil. Uh, they
Oh
have a
wow.
they have a group in Madagascar. So there's
Yeah.
a revival in the among Christian people all over the world to get back to the family, get back to Christian schooling and homeschooling.
Yeah. That is exciting. I I was so encouraged when I went to that link for Christ EDU, and actually one of the individual members is Dr. Mike Myers.
Yeah,
He is the founder of Day Spring Christian Academy, which is the school here in Lancaster that
yeah,
is
that's right. I heard about
the
that. Do you know him personally? You should get to know him.
I have met him. Huh?
If you don't know him, you should get to know him. He's a very important man.
Yeah, I have met him before one time. He probably won't remember me. He was speaking at a banquet that was being given to some pastors, and he was there also. It was during when we had the gubernatorial race, and Doug Mastriano was the running conservative governor that we were all supporting here in Pennsylvania. But the headmaster now, I'm in contact with the headmaster now. His name is Dan Stone. He's the headmaster of Day Spring Academy now, and he I was another pastor friend of mine gave me his information, so I'm looking forward to visiting and doing a tour of the school because it is one of the options if for some reason we're not able to homeschool. Our desire is to homeschool our children, but if for some reason it becomes harder in terms of if my wife is is a stay at home now, but she's also um, in the marketplace, so it's kind of our plan B, I should say.
Yeah, glad you hooked up with him. Let me just say something about that model. Uh,
Yeah.
Dayspring is a member of FACE, That's Foundation for
Yes.
American Christian Education.net. And there are different Christian school models nationally, but in my judgment, it's the Lexus or the top model. You can do different, like you can buy different kind of automobiles. If you could afford a
Yeah.
Lexus, that's one of the best cars. But I drive an Escape. I don't need a Lexus, but Dayspring is part of a network of schools and they provide the best of all the models. And what's happened is that Dr.
Yeah.
Myers is been pulled away from the headmaster because their group is growing so rapidly now nationally that he's actually going around training and setting up and starting Christian schools around the nation. That's what he's doing full time. And they've got Face, I think, has about 40 schools in the hangar. And they're right now in the process of
Wow.
starting up about 40 schools nationally. So it's exciting time for him. And yeah, I'd forgotten that school was right near where you live.
Yes, sir. It is. My one pastor from our previous church sends his children there. We have other friends who send their kids there. The school is apparently exploding now because the Mennonite school here, Lancaster Mennonite, which is one of the big, big, historically big Christian schools here, has gone woke. It has gone. They have embraced everything. A lot of my friends who went there like 30 years ago, they say that's not even the same school anymore. In fact, one of my friends
Hmm.
recently told me it's just a public school that says it's a Christian school. They just do everything basically
Hmm.
like a public school would do. They have all the, you know,
I understand. I
everything,
understand.
all the, yeah.
And that's not true
So
with Dayspring.
well, that's what I'm saying. As a result of that, a lot of people have pulled their schools, their children out of Dayspring. I mean, out of Lancaster Mennonite, and they're sending them to Dayspring. So Dayspring is in a season of expansion, and they are, in my understanding, they are exploding right now, which is good news for our movement for Christian education.
Yeah.
Um, so you know, as we talk, you have basically been there, done that. Um, m- my question, my next question to you is, what, who are the enemies of this movement?
Yeah. One would be we have to always be on guard about the government. Um, and we're not in favor of the tax funded voucher. And the reason
Yeah,
is when the government starts funding the Christian schools, they will own them eventually. And Alex is very much agreement with me on that, and so is Diane Douglas. So we want to keep a separation of school and state, just like we have in
yeah,
America, the separation of church and state. Now, the separation of church and state often is presented as a left wing idea, but it's not necessarily so. We don't believe a separation of God and government. We think the law of God should influence government, but we don't want the state having jurisdiction over the church. And when we founded the United States, we broke from the European model in England and Germany and such as that, where the state and the church were one and the government was paying the salaries of the pastors. And here, our salaries and our income is strictly on love offerings and tithes and offerings. And that's the unique thing about the American model. So we want to keep that with our Christian schools. We don't want the government funding through vouchers our Christian schools. So that's one danger. And unfortunately, right now, we're losing that battle because it's the red states and the Republican states that are pushing the voucher on the Christians, and many are falling for it. And your audience can go to our webpage for information. If they want some information on the voucher, they can contact me at exodusmandate.org,
That
or they could
yep.
contact the office at exodusmandate@gmail.com, and we could send them out documents why the voucher is not a good thing for Christian schools and homeschoolers. So that's one thing that we have to be on the watch for. You remember the words of Ronald Reagan? He said the most terrifying 9 words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you." And so we don't want government help for our Christian schools. So that's one thing that we need to be on guard against. And then, of course, this current government is unfriendly to all things Christian, and so they may try to, shut us down, and we have to be on guard. But Christians have always had persecution, and it can stimulate us to go on. China is in real stress from the government, and the church in China is just exploding. I mean, there may be
Yeah.
100 million born again Christians in China right now. So persecution won't stop us if we're determined to do God's will.
Amen. Now, so that those are kind of the enemies, kind of mostly outside. I mean, I don't consider all Republicans insiders personally. I think Republicans empower public schools and the public
Yeah,
education system just probably as much as the Democrats. I mean, according to Miss Diane, when I was talking to her, both sides need the public schools. The
right,
one side needed to indoctrinate children. The one side needed to for workers to educate
right.
workers to support the capitalist capitalism.
Yeah, I
So
think they
both
both agree on
sides, yeah. Yeah. So I don't consider Republicans kind of insiders per se. I mean, there are some that will at least talk about it and confront the system, but most of them, when given the opportunity, no one wants to, at the very least, delete the Department of Education.
it.
They all are happy to put someone in there to pacify everyone and hope that they vote them in again the next term. Um,
Right.
so I don't consider them insiders, but I believe we have roadblocks on the inside. Now I know you wrote uh one of the things that you sent me was pastors taking cover.
Yeah, that's probably the roughest thing I've written. Um, I've been in the ministry myself nearly 50 years, and I'm most disappointed with the lack of help we're getting from the conservative born again pastors. Um, and they're not stepping up like they should. And so I created this to try to motivate them. And it has been improving since the pandemic. But you couldn't get 5 pastors together 10 years ago to discuss it. And so right now we're pushing hard to try to awaken the pastors. And I'm talking now about Bible believing conservative pastors to realize the responsibility they have to their children in their flocks. Um, we know a lot of churches around here where And these are Bible believing conservative churches where the people, you'll a big mega church, and you'll have about one third homeschooling, one third in Christian schools, and maybe one third in public school. Well, those one third of the children still in public school are being harmed, and the pastors are not doing much to try to get them out. And most of the activity that goes on in our movement is mothers and fathers, and it's not the pastors that are leading the people to lead. And so that's got to change. And I know you're in the Lancaster area there, which is a kind of the Bible Belt of Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of strong Christians in that region. And I just hope that I'm glad to see that Dayspring Christian School is doing so well there, but there needs to be a concerted effort to awaken the pastors in the churches that what their responsibility they have to their flock, to the children in their flock. One thing we've done with Exodus Mandate since we've been at it longer than most anybody else is that we've been able to field test the arguments for it and making adjustments and strategies that a lot of people nationally are using now that we pioneered. And one of the biggest problems we have is dealing with the salt and light argument. That's the main argument that Christians use to justify staying in the public school with their kids. So we try to deal with that. As Jesus did talk about being salt and light, and it's in the Bible, but he didn't mean put little children in harm's way in pagan schools. And so Christians take a verse like that and they take it out of context and make it say put words in Jesus' mouth that he didn't say. He never said put children in harm's way in pagan schools.
Yes. So I that was going to be my next thing here as I battle with the internet at the same time. Um the This article that was written, I believe I originally found it on the Nehemiah Institute by Jed Jusino.
Yeah.
The Salt and Light argument. I actually read it probably a year or two ago when I read it, and I thought this was a very interesting perspective because I had never heard of this perspective before. And I also know that most people that send their children to public school, this is their argument.
Right.
Now, most of us are now arguing and calling people to really think about the this proposition, because we're not asking Christians to stop being involved in public schools as missionaries, but we're just asking Christians to stop sending their children to be
Right.
missionaries. And this particular post, like I said, blessed me uh, a lot, because the gentleman Jed Jusino was actually not only uh, reorienting all of us, including myself, on what God meant by salt and light. He also talks about a city on a hill. This is where this is now became the best argument for Christian school.
Yeah.
Christians in every culture are supposed to be a city on a hill in the world, but not of it.
Mm-hmm.
When you send your children to public school, you're sending your children to become of the world. You're sending the children to the world to be educated, and then you expect the children to be effective on the city that is a shiny city on a hill, when they're being trained by the enemy um, to to uh, 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 become enemies of their own heritage.
Right. we can have you. We know Jay Jusino very well, and he is a member of ChristEDU.org. And so, if you would like to have him on your show, I can arrange it, help you arrange it. He's a
Oh yeah.
great writer, great speaker, researcher, and he's a homeschool family. Lives in near Montgomery, Alabama.
Yes, sir. Would love to speak to Jay. Absolutely. Um, I would love to speak to him. So let me go back to the other one though, real quick.
Hmm.
You said uh, um, that the Barna Research Group had published a report that revealed that only 9% of conservative pastors strongly and aggressively support Christian schooling. Another 21% support Christian schools and may even have their own children, but fail to teach and encourage their members to do the same. Another 28% of pastors never address Christian education, homeschooling, but present instead a position of opposition to Christian schooling.
Yes.
My question to you is, as kind of as a former pastor, although you don't strike me as the type that will avoid certain subject, do you think a lot of these pastors avoid this because it's politics? It has a lot to do with politics, and for some reason they don't believe they should talk about politics in the pulpits.
Yeah, that's part of it. Now, this study by Barna Group and this pamphlet here, that study is I mentioned the pamphlet. This is about 4 years old, and
Yeah.
I think our position with the pastors has really improved in the last 4 years since the pandemic, but it's still not good enough. Um, I was at ACSI headquarters in Colorado Springs, and the one of the senior people there told me that. And now, about 9 or 10% of evangelical pastors at that time strongly supported K-12 Christian schools, which is pretty bad. Uh, about 20% more were supportive by having their own children in Christian schools, and they were generally supportive but not aggressively so in seeking to awaken the families in their churches to get out. But about 28% of the pastors, and that's the ones that believe in God and being born again like you and me, were in opposition. And I'll give you an example right
Mm,
here in the community. Now, again, the situation is fluid and it's improving even as I complain about it. So we know of a new Christian school that started here in Columbia, South Carolina about 10 years ago, and it's exploded. Now, after 10 years, they have nearly 800 children, and they're having to build and everything.
wow.
Very good news. It's in a Baptist church, but the principal of the lower school goes to another Baptist church in Columbia, and she's in the church, and the pastor would not allow her to promote and advertise the school that she was principal of in his church because they had so many public school teachers in the church. I mean, she should have been given equal time, and he's a supposedly a born again Christian. And so now let me explain something that happened to me decades ago. And I at the time this was about 1999, and I had been doing Exodus Mandate just 2 years, and I had written a book called Let My Children Go. Actually, I've got a copy of it here on the shelf. I'll step away and get it for you. And then I had a movie with the same title. And I gave it to a close friend of mine, a large Baptist church in Columbia around 1999 or 2000. And this man, who's passed on now, was a godly man, it was a big church of several thousand, and he was a soul winner. And I gave it to him, and he said to me after he had read it and we talked about a month later, he said, Ray, if I tried to do what you're recommending, getting the families out of the public school in my church, he said, they would throw me out on the street, meaning the church would throw him out on the street. He said, I've got 30 public school teachers in my church, and they would not stand for it. And I remember realizing, whoa, I've got a problem. This is going to be harder to do, reaching the pastors, because they're afraid to take a stand in the church because of the public school people in their church. So that's what you need to know. But because so many are leaving now, it's the tables are turning, and there are more people in some of these evangelical churches that are in homeschooling or in Christian schools than there are in public schools. And so the pastors may find it possible to do the right thing when the tables are turned, and we can put pressure on the public school families to leave. But that's what's going on right now. We're in a transition period, and that's why this little pamphlet is so important, because it needs to be given to pastors in the Lancaster area.
So here's my concern though, which this is the thing that I don't understand. And I know these numbers are a little bit old, but I suspect there's not much of a difference in terms of, because one of my things that I complain about a lot is that I find that pastors don't talk about things like abortion. They don't talk about, the LGBT stuff. They basically avoid all the tension points in culture. So it feels to me like this is exactly why, or in part at least, why they're doing this, or they're not doing this. But here's a concern. So in the same pamphlet, you said that according to the Nehemiah Institute, 80 to 85% of church youth attend public school, and that 80% of them embrace a strong secular view of life. And in 2002, the Southern Baptist Family Life Council revealed that 88% of children raised in evangelical homes leave the church and their faith at the age of 18 and never return. This was in 2002. Again, I would argue that if that number dropped, it's possible it went up. But if it dropped, it probably didn't drop anywhere near under 50%. So it's still a very concerning problem that this amount of evangelical children are living the faith, and they all have the same kind of common denominator, which is a lack of Christian education. We're basically uh, asking the government to help us disciple children, an antichrist government to help us disciple children. My question to you is, like, I feel like pastors, if they saw that number in these pastors conferences, in these organizations and mission sending movements, that's a pretty concerning number. Like, why is it not connecting for pastors, on at least on that level? Like, what do the pastors say in your experience when you give them those numbers?
Um, I'm I finally, reluctantly, sadly, come to a conclusion in my own mind in the last 5 to 8 years that I didn't want my mind to go there, and I'm going to say it to you. I think it's possible that 25% or higher of evangelical pastors are not called men. If they were called men,
Mm.
they would behave differently. So I basically have what I call the one third, one third, one third. About one third are now doing what I would want them to do. It may not be quite that high, but there's a growing number in the one third group that are trying to take action in their community and with their flocks about their children. I just talked to a pastor today that's about an hour and a half from you in Pennsylvania, and I mean, he is really doing wonderful work in his city and in his church. He's just all in on the same arguments that you and I are making tonight. About one
Mm.
third of them could be persuaded to come over to where you and I are here tonight. I'll give you an example. I'm not going to name it. There are two very large mega Baptist churches in my city. They are sound, gospel preaching, Christ loving churches. And they're each of them have one, the smallest has about 3,000 members. Both of the senior pastors in those churches have their kids in a Christian school, and they are kind of quietly promoting it within the church. I would guess about half of the members are either in Christian schools or in homeschooling, but maybe half or a third are in public school. And they're not taking action right now to get those kids out, but they themselves are doing the right thing for their personal children. And so the step for them is to go to the next step and take action to extract the children in their churches because they are being harmed in the public schools in this city. And I have explained
Mm.
it to one of them recently, and he has got his own children in a very good Christian school. So I think one third are doing the right thing basically now, like you and me. That probably is a little high. One third are going to join us soon, but one third of these evangelical pastors are never going to take the right step because they're not called. And the Bible calls that person a hireling. I'm not saying they're not
Mm.
saved, but if they were called, they would care for the flock. Nobody has to ever tell you, John, to take care and protect your children. You just know it goes with the territory of being a father. And so if you're a
Right.
pastor, you have intuitively, instinctively know that you've got to take care of your flock. Now, I pointed out in this pamphlet that a lot of them are uninformed. They really are ignorant men. I gave an example of it goes back 15 or 20 years, one of the largest churches in the city. The pastor, he's now retired, came to me and asked me, I hear stories, he said, about things going on in the public schools. Is that true? And I about fell out of my chair when he asked me. I said, wow, he's president of the South Carolina Baptist Convention, and he didn't know that. So a lot of them are
Mm.
ignorant about what's going on outside the four walls of their church. But it's hard to plead ignorance now with all that's going on. So I think, does that help you with the question? One third, one third, one third. And you need to realize
Yes.
that that
That is.
group, that there's a middle group who will do the right thing in going forward once they're presented with these arguments.
Yeah. And that's my hope. That's my mission, is to present the what's going on, make the argument. um I find that a lot of people do not have a clear, a lot of, even these pastors and a lot of Christians who should know better, do not have a clear um Christian philosophy of education.
That's
They
right.
assume that the government is a neutral ground, and that there's such a thing as neutrality, where you can accumulate and disseminate knowledge from a neutral position. And this is concerning to me. But one of my hopes with this podcast and everything else that God will allow me to do is to try to argue and present to pastors that even if the school was safe, even if there was no bullying, the whole LGBT stuff was not in there, and everything was nice and clean. Um, the philosophy itself is the problem. The
Yes.
worldview that is being presented, the education, the bucket, or the best line, the basis, as Francis Schaeffer would say, the secular humanist best is not going to produce future Christians. It's not going to produce future Christian lawyers. It's not going to produce future Christian doctors. It's going to produce secular humanist lawyers and doctors.
Yes, we're seeing a lot of attrition in the evangelical church. I'm in the South, and there's a lot of Southern Baptists here, and the Southern Baptist denomination has been a very conservative, Bible believing evangelical denomination. It's the largest Protestant denomination, and they historically have claimed the last decade they have 17 million to 18 million Southern Baptists. Now their Lifeway, which is the official research arm of the Southern Baptists, claim there are only 13 million Southern, faithful Southern Baptists. They've lost 4 or 5 million in the last 10, 15 years. But it's worse than that, John. There's only 4 or 5 million faithful Southern Baptist Christians that are in services on any given Sunday. So they may have 13 million members, but they don't have 13 million people in worship services on the Lord's Day. So the attrition is just awful. Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with education. That's probably the main culprit.
Yeah. The other thing that I saw that is a concern for you guys with Exodus mandate um, had to do with the government vouchers, and you did kind of mention a little bit about the vouchers, and how Republicans are the main um, kind of pushers of that. Um, before I go there, though,
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about um, the the Christian homeschooling movement, and kind of legally. I know I watched a video of you. This was probably a few years back, talking about how some people were having a closed meeting at Harvard to talk about how they would come after the homeschool movement. How is that going? Did anything materialize out of that? I know some lady from Harvard wrote an article saying that public schools, homeschooling is dangerous and needs to be stopped. But
Right.
what else came out of that?
Well, it was sort of shut down because of COVID when it happened, but the people that were
Yeah,
behind that movement haven't given up. And they're frightened by the fact that there are 5 million children that are being taught the Bible and God's Word and Christian worldview. They're being taught America's Christian heritage, which is what Dayspring School in your area does so well. And it'll
yeah,
create a different type of citizen. And they some years ago, Homeschool Legal Defense sent me some of the law school journal articles dealing with the homeschooling. And you have these law school reviews, and they're peer journals where people debate important legal concepts before they become law. And a few years ago, there was a lot of discussion about we've got to do something about this homeschool movement. We can't allow it to continue. And we've got to find legal ways to shut it down and suppress it. And so, yes, they're very concerned about it. And and that's why we need to keep growing, because there's strength in numbers. And I think right now the movement is so great and so dynamic and so wonderful that people would not give it up at point of death. They
Yeah.
would suffer real persecution before they would give it up. So yes, you're right. That was good that you pointed that out. That was a Harvard symposium, and we had some of our people showed up for it. So they were trying to have a symposium on how to suppress our movement and shut us down, and we had people show up. And so yeah, and there are kids that are homeschooled, have gone to Harvard and graduated top of the class, and we're in the Harvard Law Review. So they homeschool kids are everywhere now.
Yeah. Praise the Lord. Okay, so now we are talking about the voucher,
Mm-hmm.
but before, so one thing that I found interesting um, is that is the Blaine Amendment.
Yeah,
So
good.
can you talk about that a little bit, the Blaine Amendment?
Yes, I can. And if your audience is interested, I commissioned two real prominent Christian constitutional scholars or lawyers to write a paper on that. So I could send that to you, anybody, if they would contact me at exodusmandate.org or exodusmandate@gmail.com. All right, let me explain the Blaine Amendment. In 1878, James Blaine was Speaker of the U.S. House from Maine, very
Yeah.
prominent, powerful political leader in America. He actually ran for president. I forget which party it was, but he nearly got elected president of the United States, but lost. And I don't know who he lost to. I forget that part. But this was during a time in after the Civil War in America where the Catholic and Protestant divide was much greater and stronger, and they were more at each other's throats than they are today. And the public schools were seen as a Protestant domain or Protestant schools. They they were not Christian in the way that we would want it to be today, but they were pro-Christian, and Christians were involved in it and running them. And the Catholics felt like, wow, you're funding, the government is funding uh, Protestant schools, which are the public schools. We want some of that money too. And so they were lobbying for vouchers or grants. And Blaine created the Blaine Amendment, said that there would be no government money going to sectarian religious educational institutions, which was another word for Catholic, because the Protestants were getting the money through the public schools. It failed to make the Constitution amendment at the federal level. It just about made it, but it failed at the federal level. So 38 states inserted Blaine amendments in their state constitutions, including South Carolina, where I live. We've got one in our constitution. It says literally you cannot give state money to private sectarian religious institutions. And that would take in Catholic, Jewish, or Protestant today. So while it had an
Yeah.
anti-Catholic origin, it now is a protection in South Carolina against the government giving vouchers in South Carolina. So I love the Blaine Amendment, and
Yeah.
they don't Republicans don't know what to do about it because it's very clear in our Constitution, and it is in 36 other states. Does that help you a little bit? I can send you a paper on that too, if your people ask.
Yeah, I think you did. Is it the paper that says government funded vouchers endanger biblically faithful
That's it.
education?
Yeah, that's the paper. And those two guys that wrote that
Yeah.
are good friends of mine, and they're both eminent constitutional Christian lawyers.
Yes. This thank you for this paper. I read the whole thing in preparation for our meeting today. I did know about some of these cases, but then I didn't know about the others. So basically, the amendment is prohibiting that um, no money raised by taxation in any state for the support of public schools or derived from any public fund thereof, nor any public lands devoted thereto, shall ever be under the control of any religious sect, nor shall any money so raised or land so devoted be divided between religious sects or denominations.
Well, it failed
If
at the
if
federal
Yeah,
level, and 38 states put it in their state constitution. So right now, even though it had a bad purpose, it, it's
yeah,
it's now a protection for us, kind of like Genesis 50 verse 20, where uh, Joseph said to his brothers, "You meant it for evil, but God now means it for good to bring about this present result to save many people alive." So suddenly, what was meant for evil against Catholics is now a protection for Protestant evangelical schools. You see that point?
yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Um, so the this government money, how uh what is the relationship to this with the uh Title 9 specifically? Is
Well,
it
yeah.
true?
Title IX was set up to provide for women, and they could have equality in sports, I believe, and that has a lot to do with that. And I think that the Biden administration is trying to use that now to say that the 501c3, a tax exemption, is a form of aid. And actually, the
Right.
Fourth Federal Circuit Court voted unanimously. I think it was 7-0, 5-0, and threw that idea out and said, no, that is not right. Now, I have an article on that in the office, and I guess if someone asked, we could send it to your people as well. But so that happened just a few days ago with the Fourth U.S. Circuit, and that was a very good thing that happened. And Homeschool Legal Defense Association has put out a paper on it.
Yeah. So the reason I'm very interested in this particular situation here is because I recently reached out to a friend of mine who is works for a pretty well known conservative organization here in Pennsylvania, and I wanted to know what that organization is doing uh, to help awaken Christians to the problem and the contradiction that is public school. If we're fighting to basically save our country, I would think any like serious, truly conservative organization would focus on um, Christian education as a top priority and as a kind of the option that we're recommending and pushing for parents. But to my surprise, this very good friend of mine, who I respect, um, told me that their organization was helping Christian education by fighting for the voucher for school choice. Basically, their contribution to helping this cause was pushing for voucher, which will give, as you know, parents the option to take their kids out of public school and use that same money to put their kids in the school of their choice. Um, what would be your response to that thinking?
Well, it's pretty widespread. Um, the Heritage Foundation, which is one of the great conservative think tanks in America, my brother used to be employed by them, and I've supported them over the years. They support the voucher. Um, a lot of the state policy groups are, and if you're a superficial, shallow thinker, and I hate to call them that, it's easy to see how they would get there. They say, look, they finally have come to the conclusion that we need to grow private Christian home education. What's the big problem? One of the big problems is holding it back. Not enough money. Let's let the government fund it. No, no, it'll be dangerous. It's a Trojan horse. You may remember the mythological city of Troy brought the Trojan horse into the city, and it was going to save them from the Greeks. And it ended up being the undoing of the city of Troy and caused their destruction. So you have to show these people that this is not right, and they're actually harming, in the long run, private Christian and home education by supporting the voucher. And it's very easy to show. Um, I think I sent you this as well in the on the
Yes.
digital file, and you can print that out and give it to anybody you want. It's pretty persuasive. I've got two articles in it. Alex Newman's has got an article in it. Diane Douglas does, and our arguments are incontrovertible against the voucher. But a lot of people who are on the other voucher side have not looked at the arguments we make. And when you show it to them, if they're people of goodwill, a lot of them can see it, and they reverse themselves. But we need your help on that
Yeah.
too, and you need to get your friend in that group in Pennsylvania and let him see our material and let him deal with it.
Yeah. Well,
He
yes,
doesn't
sir.
have
That
any
would
answers
be.
for it. I can say
Yeah, that would be
he
the
doesn't have any,
first thing.
yeah,
Yeah, that would be the first
yeah,
thing I will I will be doing, because I want, and I am so thankful for the material that you sent me. I'm thankful for this conversation, because this will be useful as well, by the grace of
yeah.
God. Um, but so as we conclude here,
Uh-huh.
um, there's to me there seems to be, and I'm gonna go back to that because that's kind of my drum, I guess. Um, there seems to be a lack of courage that, so I don't think a lot of these people do not have most of this information. I suspect many of these people may not want to hear it, or may not
That's
be
part.
ready to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
um because the thing about what you and I are talking about, and I'm thankful for the Exodus mandate, that just means you are a man of action. You're not just talking about things, you're actually doing something tangible about it. This is why I respect Alex Newman as well, because he actually has done things, tangible things. um But what I'm trying to say is, when things like these are presented to a person, a genuine and truthful person, they have to do something in response. The
Mm-hmm.
reason why a lot of times people don't want to see the evidence, people don't want to see the argument, is because they're pretty comfortable in their lane, and that's kind of, you're rocking the boat. That they don't want you to rock the boat. The boat is pretty comfortable. We're going at a steady pace. The paychecks are coming in. Everybody likes us. We're not having any enemies, um, at least not that we know of. um, and so this is kind of rocking the boat. This is bringing in, asking for trouble, asking basically for persecution. So what um what would be your message, I guess, to parents first and foremost, but then also to pastors and ministers, those the one third, but also the other one third that might need to be saved first, but we don't know. What would be your message as kind of an elder in this field?
Well, they're going to have to find courage, and I write about that in this little pamphlet. You know, C.S. Lewis made the comment. Let me quote it: "Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the focus of every virtue at its testing point. Nobody will say I'm a coward,
Mm,
but they do display lack of moral courage at times, and we need to teach courage, and you've got to do the right thing. There are lots of people in the voucher movement who would maybe have a mistaken approach, but they're good people of goodwill. I had an unusual thing
yeah,
happen at my house here just a few days ago. We celebrated the graduation of a girl in our church who graduated from the University of South Carolina recently, and she was here for a party with her boyfriend, and he's been hired by one of the pro voucher uh, think tanks in Washington D.C. And I
yeah.
gave him this booklet, and he took it with him, and he had never heard those kind of arguments before. It really shocked him, and
Yeah,
he was looking at it, and I could tell his mind was just scrambling. Here I'm getting ready to be employed by a group that's pushing the voucher, and I was telling him I was his friend and his girlfriend that it was a bad idea. I don't know what he's going to do with the information, but he's got the booklet, and I think he's a godly young man. And I don't know what he's going to do, but I'm hoping he'll take it up there to the higher ups and say, "Look, I don't agree with you on this anymore." So we'll see. But it's some of our best policy groups. The Heritage Foundation has been around for decades, and my younger brother was employed by them. Back in the 1990s, and they put out a lot of good stuff, but they're pushing the voucher. So we just have to
yeah,
persuade them and show them that it's a bad idea, and it's not hard to do. The arguments that we make are incontrovertible and indisputable. So go see your friend and give him a copy of this booklet. Let him
yes,
deal with it.
sir. Will do.
I don't know if that
Will
answers
do.
the question, but yeah. But what's happening? We're winning. Our movement is winning, and if we keep working hard over the next 3 to 5 years, I think we could grow homeschooling, Christian schooling, and private schooling up to 25 or 30% of the total. And we think the public school system will begin to collapse and implode. And then the politicians will be forced to give it up, say, look, we're not doing a good job. The government's failing. We're going to hand it over to you churches and let y'all do do education. And we're going to give it up. And we're going to pave the roads, pick up the garbage, and arrest the criminals. And quit using money for a failed public education system that doesn't work. And when that happens, that's going to be the revival that we're looking for. If the churches will get up,
Yeah,
step up, and do their job, they'll save their children, save the children in the church, they'll save the children in the community, and they may save the country.
yeah. Amen. Um, lastly, before we go,
Mm-hmm.
can you talk about frontline ministries? Because I think what frontline ministries is about is crucial to what you just said there at the end about revival.
We started Frontline Ministries, Reverend Lee Adams and I, in 1994, and it was a broad mission of revival, prayer, discipleship, apologetics, and Christian education. And we never got the funding that we needed to become a major organization. So in 97, we kind of narrowed our focus to K-12 Christian education, Christian schooling, and homeschooling. We didn't give up the other items, but we just didn't have the staff to do it. And so Exodus Mandate became a subset. It doesn't have independent status under Frontline Ministries, but it became better known than Frontline Ministries.
Yeah.
It was under Frontline Ministries. So Frontline Ministries is our 501c3 tax exempt ministry, and Exodus Mandate is really a project under that. Does that help you a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, I am of the belief that God will only send a revival to the church here in America if we can sustain it. I think the Reformation was able to be sustained and to become a real powerful movement that changed the world because the culture and the people were eager to do whatever it took, including risking their own lives. And they were not um, beholden to the government in the way that we are today. So I think if the church would take up this mantle of education to be the primary educator, which is our original role anyway, the family and then the church. I think if we do this and really uh, prove ourselves in that, God will send revival that can be sustained. And I am hopeful about that.
Right. Very good. I agree with that. It's not going to come unless it's a obedient group. And but we're hopeful now in ways that we were not 5 years ago. And
Yeah.
my wife and I are living our dream, and it's exciting to see so many young men and women like you coming along who catch it, and y'all can pick up the baton as we move on to our reward. I hope to be
Yes,
around a few
sir.
more years, but I am 80.
Well, we will glean from you and your wife for as long as we can. Yes, we will. I want to thank you, sir. I hope this is the first of many conversations. Um, I want to thank you so much for doing this with me, for hanging in there with me. But I want to thank you for the job and the dedication, the sacrifices that you and your wife and your family have given to the church. You guys are truly a gift to the body of Christ, and I just wanted to say thank you so much again for joining me on this podcast. It means a lot to me.
Thank you for having me, and I pray God will bless you in this endeavor and use you as a voice there in Pennsylvania and maybe beyond.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Amen.